Hello guys, welcome back to John's Workshop, and in this video we're going to be refurbishing a second-hand machine vise. So this vise is an extra tough, that's its proper name. It's a 4-inch vise, it's of Indian origin. I think the company's been around since the 1970s, and looking at what they make today, they look like they make some pretty nice stuff, including CNC modular vices and things like that. Looks to be quite decent stuff. So this has arrived during the last week, so I've bought this for my shaper as part of the shaper restoration that I'm doing, so that we can have a vise on there. So as I said, it's second hand, it needs a bit of TLC, moreover it needs a bit of a investigation, strip down, clean assessment of whether we need to do anything with it, and I am I am resisting the urge to want to paint it to match the rest of the shaper, and we'll see where we get to with that. I really don't want to go down that route with this if I can help it, so we'll see whether we think it needs it or not, and I'm 50-50 on it, so as we strip it we'll make a decision on what we do. So I think that's probably it for what's on the board. So with all that being said, I'll bring you in, we'll get it on the bench and we'll have a look at it in its current state as it's arrived here, and then we'll start taking it to bits and see what we find. Okay, so this is the beast. So as I said, it's an extra tough, so it's still got the original manufacturer's badge plate on it. It's a 4-inch opening, it's got a model number on it that's barely legible, and its opening of 4 inches. So I'm fairly pleased with this. It's really low profile, so from the underside to the top is very low profile, which is one of the reasons that I've gone for this and one of the things that's drawn me towards it. Just looking for my 6-inch rule. I think it's 90mm from memory. Well, it's even less than that. It's about 85mm, which in bananas, as Max says, is 3¼ inches. So really low profile, which is really what I wanted for the shaper. Across this way, it's probably between the hole centres about 135mm, which is 5 inches pretty much between the hole centres, so it will fit nicely onto the shaper table. So as I said, it's a 4-inch opening, so 100mm width, and opening wise it's just over 4 1/8, which is 105mm pretty much that way, and then gripping, so of that 85mm depth of the entire vise, 45mm of that is gripping depth, which is really what sort of attracted me to this. There's a lot of gripping space for the actual overall height of this for the profile, so very good from that respect. We've got one idiot mark in the base of the vise, and only one. The rest of it looks in pretty good condition. There's a nasty burr around that, so that's as it's been created, so there's a burr all around the outside of that. I think what we'll probably do with that is, obviously we'll take the burr off and we'll probably look to put some JB weld or something in there just to fill it, more to stop it collecting swarf and things that are then going to get in the way of subsequent part loads and things like that. So we might do something like that. We'll largely strip it down and have a look what we've got, but so far quite happy. The underside's quite rusty, but doesn't appear to be anything really nasty on there in terms of where it's been dropped or banged or anything like that. So we'll give that a bit of clean up and see what we do with that, whether we attempt to do anything on the milling machine with that in terms of a skim, or whether we just clean the corrosion off it, see what it looks like once we've had a bit of that sort of care and attention to it. So with the application of what I'm going to call sympathetic elbow grease, we've finished up with this, which is, to the feel now, very nice indeed. So there was a bit more draw filing work that you saw earlier, just very gently with the file, followed on with some different grades of Scotch Brite, and then finally a flat oil stone just gently over the surface, just to try and pick any high spots. Now the high spots it was picking were all the way down this side, a bit on this back corner, a couple of areas predominantly around the perimeter, and also around the perimeter of this sort of depression in the casting, if you like, in the middle. But certainly that feels very nice now. There's no raised edges. We've got rid of all of the corrosion. We've got some light pitting, we've got some staining, especially in this top corner and down here where the water's obviously been sitting on it. So what I'm going to do next, I think, is get this up onto the surface table, onto the granite surface table, with some very thin feeler gauges, and see whether or how flat we think this actually is sat on the surface plate, to make an assessment on whether we leave it as that and do nothing more with it, or if we've got rock or we've got any kind of bow and this isn't flat, then we'll make a decision whether we're going to put this up on one of the machines and try and do something with this undersurface. But so far, vastly improved. Okay, so we're in at the surface plate, surface table, and we've got a 1.5 thou feeler, and basically at the front end it's not going. As I come back it starts to, it's not going till I get past this bolt hole, and then once I get past this bolt hole it's basically, I can slide that all the way down the underneath of the vise, and then it starts to grip at the back here and at this back corner. So it's obviously resting on this corner and this corner, and then where the bolt hole is on the opposite side I can get the 1.5 thou feeler right under it. I've gone for a 2 thou feeler, and that will go under, certainly down this side the 2 thou goes under no problem. I've gone for a 3 thou and that won't go, so we're somewhere between 2 and 3 thou, largely out of flat on the underside of there. Now this isn't a precision grinding vise, it's to go on the shaper. I can't really make my mind up whether I should address this or just leave it. So what I'm going to do is see if I can find an easy way. I've had an idea, so I'm just going to play around on the milling machine for a bit to see if there's an easy way of getting this set up with reference to this surface in both axes, in both planes. If I can do that easily, then I'm probably going to have a go at taking a tiny skim off the underside of this just to flatten it, and that will also get rid of some of this water staining that we've got. Not that that's a problem, but so I'll see. If I can't do it easily, I'm probably going to live with it and see how we get on. So I'll bring you back in a moment with the results of that. Okay, so here's my idea. So we've got the part held in the vise on the rail that the moving jaw slides on, clamped in the vise jaws. We've got 2 stacks of parallels and 1, 2, 3 blocks. Now what I've done is gone through and measured all of the parallels where we're using them to make sure that we're within 10 microns ish of each other is the worst error I can measure, and we tap down hard onto these parallels so that's all nice and firm. And then what I've done is transferred my markings from what I found on the surface plate with the feeler gauges. So where I've got a D, I've classed that as datum. That's where I couldn't get the 1.5 thou feeler under, in the corners largely where it was touching, and then where I could get the feelers under, I've put a bit of an approximation of the kind of size in imperial of the feelers I could get underneath. And what I'm doing now is scanning with a DTI to see if I can corroborate what I found with the feeler gauges on this top surface, and if I can, I'm fairly confident at that point that we're set up correctly in the vise for me to take a very light skin pass over the base of this to make this surface nice and flat again. So I've been round with the clock, and largely I'm pretty much tracking, not necessarily the exact numbers because I was only trying to stick feeler gauges underneath, which isn't very accurate, but I am definitely tracking the direction. So where it was a high point, i.e. touching the surface plate, I'm reading 0 on the clock, and where it was a lower point where I could get the feeler gauges in, I'm reading anywhere between 3, 4, 5 thou gap where the gaps were. So I'm reasonably confident that we've got this set pretty well. Okay, so we've got a fly cutter in, quite a long stick out. We've just ground a nice high-speed steel, nice new high-speed steel, blank up. Thank you, John, you know who you are. And we're now going to give this a go. So I've just gently touched on by hand on the high spot, and I've wound on a 2 thou or 50 micron cut. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm going to try and cut it dry, and I'm going to be going at 280 revs a minute, no faster than that. So we'll see what happens. Right, I'm going to persevere off camera, another couple of light passes, and I'll bring you back. Okay, we started to understand a little bit more what was going on with this at the start. So the original surface was very hardened, and the tool was kind of skating over the top of it, and because I was taking such light cuts, I wasn't really getting underneath the hard skin. So with a bit of perseverance, we've now got underneath that, and it's a really nice surface finish to the feel. I've cleaned most of the areas up. There's a couple of hard spots. There's one here, there's one here, there's a bit of a hard spot here where it's still skating a little bit, but it has got under the skin. I've just honed the tool up, brought a nice fresh edge to it. I've dialed in another 2 thou, and we're just going to take our final pass and see what we look like. Okay, there's our finished surface. We've been round with a file and just been round all the edges of the pockets and the outside shape, and I'm really pleased with that. That feels very nice. No pickup, not rough at all, and I've got rid of the bouncing where the hard spots were. There's one here, there was one over there, there's one about here, and there was one about here, and they've all gone. So we'll get that out of the vise and we'll get it back on the surface table and see what we've done. Okay, so we've got our DTI set up, and this is a 5/10 per division DTI, so we're reading about +1 division there, so +5/10. I don't know whether you can see this because of the light, apologies. I'll try and show you in a few places with my hand on it. +5, probably up to about +1 thou in that small area near that hole, back to kind of +5. Slide that over, come back in this side with the clock, try not to hit the camera with it. +5. This is, yeah, 1/10 of a thou, I think I said that. Zero, 0, 0. So largely within about 5/10 of a thou, other than a bit of a high area here around that hole, which could be a bit of swelling. I did stone that, but it probably might need a bit more attention. So yeah, pretty happy with that. Okay, we've got our 2 vice jaws on the surface grinder. So what we've done is taken them off. Obviously you saw me strip them earlier. We've cleaned the faces, both location and jaw face, stoned them, got rid of any high spots. We've had them on the surface table, and the thickness of both of them is absolutely bang on parallel. There's no bend, no twist, and these are absolutely rock hard. What there is on this one, and I'll zoom in a minute, there's some damage on the top of the jaw. Now I could grind the face back to remove that damage, but I'd need to take about 2mm off the total thickness of the face, or I could grind just the top of the jaws, and I'll probably need to take 10-15 thou off to clean the damage out. So I'll just zoom you in on that. Okay, so hopefully you can see this is the fixed jaw, this is the moving jaw, and this is my damage area here. So it's from the location face back, it's about 2mm deep, but from the top down it's probably 10-15 thou, something like that. Now these jaws protrude the top of the vise casting by a good 2 or 3mm, so 15 thou off the tops won't do any harm at all. So we've got it on the surface grinder on a couple of parallels, clamped up to an angle plate. We've got our wheel dressed, so we've just done that. So we're gonna come in now and just touch on, find our highest point, which will be where this damage is, and then take some light passes over the top of here. So I think that will do us. Very nice surface finish on there. We've got rid of our damage and we've cleaned both of them up to exactly the same height. So happy with that. We'll get these off the grinder now, get the edges lightly stoned just to break the razor edge, and then they're ready for rebuild. Okay, so you can see what I've done now. Very rough and ready. Got the vise base sat on top of the mill vise. I've got a clamp in each end, just very lightly nipped, just over finger tight, just to make sure this isn't going to move. And what I'm not happy with, so this blue is not paint, it's like stoved enamel, and it's really quite thick in places. So what's happened is round the bolt holes, some of that's chipped away, obviously where it's been under pressure, and the surface it's left, I mean I've run a file over this one, it's not too bad, but at the back there's big, probably 40 thou steps between where there is coating and where there isn't coating. And when it comes to me putting quite small M8 studding through here and small clamping gear for the shaper, this uneven surface is gonna bug me. So it would probably be okay with some big washers, but while we've got it in bits, I'm just going to take a very small end mill to reduce any cutting forces, and I'm just going to come in and dust over both of these faces to get them flat, to get rid of all this nonsense. So I'll bring you back when I'm doing that. Okay, we're ready for our reassembly. So we've got all of our bits cleaned up, done as much work as we're doing to this. I've resisted the complete urge that I had to paint this a different colour, so we will start putting things back together. Now that lead nut in there was a really tight fit, and obviously somebody in the past had used the nut to belt that out, and this nut was slightly bent, still is slightly bent but not as bent as it was. So we've tidied it up, had a die down it, straightened it, and the only reason I've done all of that is because I've got no Imperial hardware in the workshop, so we'll be making do with this one for now. So I'm going to leave that slightly loose until we've fitted the lead screw and the moving jaw, and that will square this up in line with the slideways, and then we'll tighten that up last thing. Okay, so the next job is refitting the moving jaw. So we're going to stick plenty of jollop on here, Okay, we'll say that's good for now. We'll have a play around with the tension later. Well, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to tweak these nuts under here for the fit, decide whether I do or don't do anything with this for now. I might leave it as it is just for now until we get sorted out, but that is now operational other than that tiny tweaking, and ready to go on the shaper. And that surface grinding at the top of the jaws has just finished that off absolutely smashing. What I'll do now is pop it back up on the shaper so we can have a look at it in all its glory in position, and then we'll close this episode out. Well, there we go, that's got our vise just sat on the shaper for now. I need to get my new T-nuts and cut some studding and sort. I might even turn some bushes to fit in here that act like a washer and a bush down to 8mm, which is the size of my studding, just to get the best fit possible. I might do that, we'll see. That could be a short video, or I might just do it and not film it, I don't know. Dead simple, top hat bushes with a hole through. So to the untrained eye that probably doesn't look much different from what it did when we started, but to this trained eye that's night and day, because I've had it apart, I've had a good look at it, I know the base is flat, I know that the top surface is within 5/10 of a thou of the base roughly all over, and I know it's in pretty good order, ready for service on the shaper. So with all that being said, I'll bring you back to the board and we'll close this one out. Well, there we go guys, that gets us to the end of this video, and pleased with that vise. That's going to be really good on the shaper I think. So I'm not quite finished with that, I've got a couple more things I want to do. As I've just said, I want to make a couple of kind of top hat washers for the screw holes, and also you'll have seen on the underside there's a groove in the middle. I want to make a couple of stepped keys to go into that groove in the bottom, so that when I locate it on the table of the shaper, it's always going to locate in the T-slot, and then I always know that it's going to be in the same place roughly on the shaper table. And that means then once we first get it loaded up, we'll get a clock on it and see what it looks like with relation to the shaper itself, because if the table's got any kind of run on it at all, which I've not checked yet, rather than machining the table surface, I'm actually going to machine the vise in situ, because that vise is only ever going to be on the shaper, and then the vise will be correct to the movement of the ram, and then I don't have to do anything with the table. I can leave the table as it is. So that's the general idea, and what that will also do is it will take a slight amount of material off the thickness of that web, which means the rails that sit underneath it will be able to sit flush hopefully at that point, and rather than having to be left slightly loose as they are at the minute and canted, which isn't ideal. So I've got some more options around making that even better once we get it fully loaded up onto the shaper table. So there are things upcoming in the future as we get more into it, but certainly for now that will be more than good enough to test the shaper out once I get through the remaining refurbishment stuff that we're doing on it. So I hope you've enjoyed that. There's been quite a lot going on in that one. I'm going to struggle to get this into a reasonable length video, but I'll try and chop it around and make it sort of decent length so it's not too long. So as I said, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you to the subscribers and the new subscribers that have come along as always, and we'll catch you all very soon on another video when we'll be making something else.